What's up, everyone? Welcome to season 4 of My Boulevard podcast. This season, we're doing something special. I am here with my co-host, Missy. Say what's up to the people, Missy.
Hello, I'm so excited to join you, Dhati. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the who, what, when, where, how, and why of urban missions.
That's right. This season, we are going to be walking through together, like live, real conversations. We're going to be talking about real questions, really practical wisdom about how to do ministry in urban environments.
Yeah, this is going to be a primer for all of us. So let's join this journey. Let's grow, learn, and push forward urban missions together.
Stay tuned. This season, we're going to talk about how you can do ministry where you live, where you work, and where you worship. So let's go.
Let's go.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of This Is My Boulevard podcast, season 4. My name is Dhati Lewis.
And I'm Missie Branch.
And we are here with Mark DeYmaz. What's up, Mark?
Hey, bro. How are you? Good to see you both.
It is always good to see you.
Absolutely.
We were just seeing each other yesterday, and it's always good to connect. And we'll get into some of that later on today. But Mark and I have been doing some cohorts, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But what I love, it's been a great experience for me because we're on, kind of the second version of us doing it. But over the course, it's like one of those things that every time you go, you learn more,
Love it.
You see different perspectives, and I've gotten a chance to go to his church. That's part of what we do at this cohort. We go actually to his church in Little Rock, and and it's one of those things that is just kind of like, oh man, okay, he's a practitioner.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that we talk about with Boulevard is that we want to be around practitioners, because I've been to enough conferences to go, and,
Yes.
and to hear people speak about things and then go to their environments and be like, you ain't doing none of that.
This is not even it. Right. Right.
Yeah, that's the truth.
This ain't, you ain't real. You ain't real.
But there's two things, Mark, that we want to talk about today. Two things that we want to talk about, and we can take it in any order that you want. But one is this concept of when tithes and offerings not enough, right? What do we do? And helping churches think about that. And for people in urban contexts, oftentimes, we're ministering to people sometimes that you can continue to grow. I mean, a lot of times the metrics are, more people, more butts in the seat.
Yes.
The more you're giving, going to have, but that's not
always the truth. No.
For some of our missionaries and things. So that's one, talking about that. But then the other one that kind of bleeds into that is this concept of kind of multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multilingual. And you have done both of those well, and so many other things, but you have done those well. So why don't you just kind of kick off and just share a little bit about kind of your journey, what you're doing, the church in Little Rock, and then how that led to specifically kind of, this desire for church economics. Start there, and then we can kind of bleed into the multi-ethnic world.
Yeah, you bet. Well, again, Dhati, Misty, thanks so much for having me. And Dhati, you and I go back now probably maybe 18 years, 15, 18 years, something like that. And
this is a theme.
Little Rock. Yeah.
It is
with folks. I got you. But yeah,
I feel like he's old.
Yeah.
The theme is all your friends have been like 60 years. Y'all known each other for 110 years. This is
yes. Yeah. You see the gray. That's why I stay far from the camera, so you don't see the gray too much.
I got you. That's why I put the hat on. That's it. The hat on. But yeah, no. We go way back, and of course, Dhati, I met him in Little Rock years ago, and very quickly, my journey, 18 years as a student ministries pastor, the final 8 of those here in Little Rock, 93 to 01, an amazing church that Dhati knows well. And, that church grew from 2,000 to 5,000 people in an 8-year span. My youth group 150 to 600, but by the late 90s, again, I'm in an amazing church, and I really wouldn't be who I am today in terms of leadership and understanding without those 8 years. But nevertheless, by 1997, 98, I looked around this amazing church one day and realized the only people of color were janitors. And that began to bother me. That was 1997. I wasn't sure in the moment why that bothered me, but something bothered me about that. And then I realized it wasn't just our church that was systemically segregated. It was like 92.5% of all churches in America at the time as Michael Emerson would later learn statistically. So all that's to say, I began to do my own homework, so to speak. I had an exegetical degree from seminary, and throughout my seminary notes, I suppose maybe some light deconstruction about what I'd learned about the church in seminary. And ultimately, that led me to pursue a church for all people, not just some people, to leave the
Mm.
suburbs and to stay in Little Rock. We felt led to go to the inner city, to the urban center of Little Rock. 30% at or below poverty when we got to this place. 67% of kids growing up in homes without fathers, as I did, along with the highest violent crime in the city, with a vision to be a church again for all people, not just some, whereby diverse men and women would will themselves to walk, work, worship God together as one. Not for political correctness or any of that, but for the sake of the gospel, to advance a credible gospel. Is you cannot continue to proclaim a message of God's love for all people from otherwise systemically segregated pulpits and pews. The message is just not believable. And of course, in the context of American life with growing diversity, the browning, as some call it, of America today, one in
Mm.
two people, Gen Z is more than 50% non-white. Millennials are 43% that way by 2042. One in two people in this country not white. But again, those are demographic shifts. But this is biblical. It's right. It's the hope of the gospel.
Mm.
Every church that Paul planted in the New Testament was multi-ethnic. Men and women, Jews,
Mm.
Gentiles, rich and poor. And again, not for any type of cultural contextualization, but for the sake of the gospel. As I began to ask myself the question, having grown up Jesuit Catholic, I knew the Our Father, right? Art in heaven, hallowed be thy
Mm.
name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done where? On earth as it is in heaven. So in the late 90s and ultimately in 2001, when I started this church, I was asking myself and seeking to address a single question. If the kingdom of heaven is not segregated, then why on earth is the church? And I can't believe here we are
Mm.
24 years later. We just celebrated our 23rd birthday. My wife and I have been at it, of course, for 24 years, just like a woman conceives a child and eventually you
Yes.
date from the birth of the child. So our church is coming up on, for my wife and I, 24 years, but we just celebrated our 23rd year, and fighting it out, so to speak, in terms of for that vision and for the sake of the gospel and to advance the common good. Matthew 5:16, to do good works, not just, as Dhati, you were alluding to, not just fancy words, right? But
Yes.
to do good works. In
Yes.
Matthew 5:16, Jesus didn't say, let them hear your good words. He said, let them see your good works, and founded on the unity and the diversity of our church, black, white, Hispanics, Asian, about 25 to 28 different nations in our church in the inner city of Little Rock, declaring that credible message from the spiritual side, but then also advancing work in the community to lower poverty, as we have from 30 to 24%. We've had aggregate
Mm.
measure in the economics of our community, job creation, and all of that. And again, for the sake of the gospel, for the glory of God.
Wow.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. That was a lot, and it was great, and I appreciate it. And what I love about that is that you were driven, and I'm always thinking about from a missiological vantage point. You were driven by mission. You were driven by
Mm-hmm.
reach, and you were driven by impacting.
And burden.
And burden.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so critical. And what I love about that is that burden has taken you into spaces and places that I don't know if you have imagined 23 years ago, 24 years ago when you started. And one of those places and spaces was still having to deal with economics, the economics of it, so it may have led with this concept of nobody on staff except for people of color. The only people of color that was on staff were the janitors, but may have started kind of ethnically, but it led to economics. And so now you're in a church, you pastored a church where you've been proclaiming the message of what happens when tithes and offerings not enough. Right? Talk a little bit about that, and just kind of how you set your church up, because a lot of people in the urban context, that is their scenario.
Yeah, and you all know churches in the inner city, the urban context, and certainly African American churches historically, they had to learn a long time ago what I had to learn in 2001. I left that
Mm-hmm.
amazing church where essentially money grew on trees. For instance, one day I went to the pastor and said, I need to add someone to my staff. And he said, no, you need 3 people. Like, that just doesn't happen. Like they give you 3. I
Wow.
asked for 1 full time, I get 3, right? I built a $3.5 million student center. I had, I could go on and on about the economics of that church, but I sat in an elders meeting one time in that former church where they're calculating growth the next year. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but it's something like, yeah, we expect to grow, 492 people next year, and 300 of those people will become giving units. And then they had an average per gift of those 300 giving units. And in other words, basically, as that church grow, it brought in revenue, right? So as you said earlier, Dhati, the more people that joined the church, butts in the seat led to bucks in the offering plate. Well, I came to the inner city, and I very quickly realized the more people that join our church, it costs us money.
Right.
I jokingly say that people, in the inner city, they take money out of the plate. They don't put money in the plate, right? So, and so very quickly, when we saw the needs of the community in a food desert, high crime, poverty, the immigrant, etc., I very quickly realized that that economic model is not going to work for us. And I can have a nice little church of 50, 75, 100 people here doing my little do good kind of thing, pat myself on the back. Aren't you so cool? You went and tried to help people. Yeah, that's not what I'm there for about me. I want to help people, right? And I want our church to glorify the Father through those good works. And I realized that there is no way that based on tithes and offerings, so to speak, the giving of our people, that we would be able not only to fund this work, but to scale it, and to, more importantly, scale the good work that could come out of this community to impact the community of our church, that is, to impact the 72204 zip code in which we went to. And so that then led to my understanding, the beginning of my journey, I should say, of leveraging assets to create multiple streams of income. So in other words, think about tithes and offerings like a single paycheck to the home. In 1960, that worked. A dad could go to work, get 1 paycheck. The family lived the middle class life. That doesn't work today. Over 80% of households have at least 2 or more income streams. I like the joke, say, well, I guess you're all rich then, right? And everybody laughs. No, because we all know, like, that's just to live a middle class life. It takes 2 or more income streams just to make it, to generally live a middle class life today. And mom's working, dad's working, everybody's side hustling, etc. So, but the church hasn't caught up with that mentality. So we're still relying on that single paycheck, if you will, with tithes and offerings, the generosity, the giving of our membership. But those days are long gone for the American household, and they are certainly long gone for the American church, though many pastors are still not quite up to speed on that. And so all that led us to develop a structure, as Dhati and Misty know, you guys know real well, where I began to think in the early 2000s about an American football team and how an American football team is structured to win, right? So you have a football team, but actually that team is made up of 3 teams: offense, defense, and special teams. Those are actually 3 separate teams on the one macro team. Those teams are actually playing separate games. Offense is very different than defense, and defense different than special teams. The games are so different. They are all coached by different, we call them coordinators. The offense coordinate, defense. They have their own coaches, their own players, their own playbooks, their own metrics. You don't ask the defense when it comes off the field, how many points did you score? Like, that's not our game. That's not what we do, right? So, and to win a big game, as we all know, you have to have all 3 of those teams established and functioning at a very high level, minimizing mistakes, or you don't win. You can put points on the board offense, but if defense can't stop the run, you don't win. Or we've all been there in the last 3 seconds of a game, the kick goes wide, the snap goes bad, or the hold, I should say, and special teams in that moment fails the otherwise good performance of the team, and the entire team loses. In that analogy, it's not offense, defense, special teams that we ended up thinking about and setting up for our own church, but it was like the spiritual game, the social game, and the financial game. So the spiritual game, of course, it's all spiritual. Everything in capital S, it's all spiritual. But if we break it down, the spiritual game is worship and Bible study and evangelism and discipleship and visiting people in the sick. Think about those as plays in a spiritual playbook. The team is coached by pastoral types, and it's played by pastoral types. A person walks into your church and they say, I just have such a heart to share Jesus with children. Well, that's the language of the offense, right? And the way that team generates income, of course, is tithes and offerings. But the social team is the nonprofit side of things. This is feeding those in need, clothing, working with the homeless, the immigrant, your works of justice, compassion, and mercy, not done under the auspices of the church, but we set up a separate nonprofit, an umbrella nonprofit that can house many programs that, again, are advancing justice, compassion, the common good, kindness, mercy, etc. And all of those works are plays in the social playbook, if you will. The team is coached by MSW types. These are social worker types, executive director types, people with a heart for the community. The game is played by people. They walk into your church and they say, man, I just have such a heart for the homeless. I just want to help the immigrant or at-risk children. That's the language of the defense. If you showed up in college football first day of practice, the coach says, what did you play in high school? And you said, I'm a wide receiver. But then the coach sends you to special teams. Like, that's all we do, because the American church, for the most part, only has a spiritual game. And so they force all the players to the offense, if you will, all the players but those players, they don't really, they play defense, they play special teams. So the point is, you set up a nonprofit and get those types of folks coaching and playing, and this team generates income through grants and donations, right? Grants, local, state, and federal, that you cannot otherwise qualify for if you apply under religious affiliation of the church. You chase these different types of grant funding through that separate nonprofit, and donations it comes from churches, from other Christians in the city. You know, churches don't write checks to other churches, but they'll write it to your food distribution program. They will send people to help work in your at-risk program for at-risk kids. And so there's a lot of reason you structure it. Plus, people that don't even believe in Jesus will send money, and they'll come work in these programs, so you can scale the good works that you would not otherwise be able to even open, let alone scale, if you were dependent solely on the giving of your members. So grants and donations provide another funding stream to advance good work. And without going into all the details, it actually helps the bottom line of the church. But then the third leg is your financial side. And that's where you're leveraging assets. Like if you own a building, to rent it. Why is it sitting empty from Monday to Saturday? Generate income, leverage the asset, right? People are an asset. Money that we have and or can aggregate is an asset. And so the financial leg is where you're leveraging assets, again, to advance the common good and the name of Christ, but you are generating for-profit income. So if I have a building and I'm just making, I rent it to someone for $3,000 a month, a certain space, that's generating for-profit income. And so that's the third leg. It's leveraging assets to generate income. It's coached by the business types, right? The marketing, the people that know business, people that are entrepreneurial and they understand that game, and it's played by business types as well, right? And so on that leg, again, ROI, return on investment, coming in. So when you think about it from a structural level, you move away from a single dimensional game, that is the spiritual game. Again, it's all spiritual, but just from the church game to the social game to the economic game, and the aggregate of tithes and offerings, grants and donations, for-profit income is what not only helps you survive and be stable, but ultimately to thrive and to sustain your church long term. That's the game of the 21st century. And pastors, I would suggest, and Dhati, I believe you would say the same thing. All of this, the hustle of the inner city, and pastors way before I got to the inner city, particularly African American pastors who were in the urban spaces, they long ago realized that tithes and offerings isn't going to get this done, and they've had to be creative. Even in our city, Black community developers, they developed homes and built homes and helped African Americans in the inner city get into home ownership, but they generated some measure of money for their church in that process. So African American churches long ago learned to play this game, but like we said, when I came from the suburbs of the inner city, I also had a huge learning curve, that was before me because of what I'd understood and how I got in. But now, and that's what I'll close here with this, it's not just inner city churches or urban churches anymore. I mean, you've got to play this game across the board in the rural setting, in the suburbs. Anecdotally, I'd say, within the next 10, 12 years, maybe even sooner, I would suggest 92% of churches are going to have to create multiple streams of income and get away from tithes and offerings, or you're just not going to survive. You're just simply managing the decline or the inevitable decline of your church if you can't do that. And let me also say, I am not interested in helping churches perpetuate their ineffectiveness. Like, in other words, I don't want to work with churches just help you generate income, if you will, just to maintain your ineffectiveness and you go home with a nice fat paycheck as a pastor. No, this is to advance the gospel, to make
Yes.
measurable impact in a community, particularly underserved, under-resourced communities. That's what I'm all about in terms of church economics and helping folks, as Dhati and I do in our cohort.
Oh, that's good. And so, do you see how even that?
Yeah.
I just learned some more.
We just learned.
Right?
Yes.
I've
No.
heard, and I've talked multiple times to Mark, and this every time I'm just like, man, why am I not doing this more?
That's all right. We
Why am
got
I not
this.
doing
That's
this?
right.
Like, I'm just like right now, as I was thinking, like blueprint is we're coming through the cohort again. Like I'm going to bring the whole team. We're going to come to the cohort
awesome.
in the one that we're going to be doing this fall. You know, and speaking of cohorts, like we have been doing these cohorts, and for those of you who heard that, like you just like, man, that was amazing. Like, where can I get more of this? Well, I'm glad you asked, because Mark and I, we do these cohorts twice a year. You usually would do one in the spring and one in the fall, and so we have one coming up this fall. You know, and so we'll put that in the notes for you to sign up. But you can also go to MyBLVD.co and you can see cohorts, and you'll see Mark and I as one of our offerings for trainings that you can be. So I want to encourage you to go and sign up, and then because we get into some of the nuts and bolts of how to flesh some of that out, and again, you get a chance to even go and see this fleshed out. And you know, you think you hear him, and you be like, "Oh man, that sounds too good to be true," but then you go and it's like, "Man, he undersold it, right?" And what he's actually doing in Little Rock, and so that's what I love.
I would love, we only have a few more minutes left with you, but I would love for you to share an example or tell us a story of a church that has applied this and how they have seen success.
Yeah. An example, for instance, at Providence Bible Church in Denver, my good friends Jason Jans and Juan Pena, years ago, I drew this model for them on a map, on a napkin in an airport, right? And they certainly had the passion. They likewise went into a underserved, under-resourced community. They were thinking multi-ethnic, but they weren't necessarily thinking about funding models. And one thing led to another. Jason, who is the founding pastor, he literally just left that. I mean, he's still in the church, but he is no longer a pastor, if you will, in the church, getting paid by the church. But over the years, he developed a killer program for people coming out of prison, low income people. On the social side, he really threw himself into that, while Juan Pena, his colleague, threw himself into the church. And what was really cool about that is that Jason, if you will, started out as the head coach of the team, and he and Juan coaching the spiritual team, if I can say it like that, like the offense. But in time, Jason realized his passion was more for the defense, if you will. That his passion was more for engaging at risk, underserved people coming out of prison, getting them jobs to create long-term economics and ultimately wealth creation from people that would otherwise have no chance for that. That is called Cross Purpose, is that nonprofit. And I can't tell you, hundreds and hundreds of people have gone through those programs, found gainful employment, and are just tremendous success stories on that. And again, it scaled the work the church would otherwise, the multi-ethnic church would not have been able to do on that, and is continuing to this day, bringing so much good to these types of folks in the Denver community. Now, one thing, little transferable truth on that, is that when we do these cohorts, the Dhati focuses on leadership and culture development, and I focus on the nuts and bolts, to use his term, of the how do you do this on the economics. So it's a good 1-2 punch. But as part of culture and leadership development, both Dhati and I believe it's more important to know who you're not than it is to know who you are, because if you know who you're not, it tells you who you need. And this is what I saw Jason do, because Jason started as the pastor, but in time recognized his pull was to defense, if I can say it that way. So he stayed the head coach, but then he said, Juan, you take this offense, if you will, you coordinate that, and then I will coordinate the defense. To use that language, the social side, right, and the community engagement. And because he understood where his heart was, of course, it's all for God. It's all for the glory of God. But specifically, he wanted to play defense. He wanted to coach defense and bring that game out. And so in both cases, the church was strengthened, the nonprofit is strengthened. People's lives are being changed literally, and brought back to life, redeemed, and it's generating money and doing more good than the church could otherwise do. So that's as fast as I can tell you. There's one story, but it started with a leader. It started with a leader who said, I can't be all things to all people. Who am I? Who am I not? Break out, get the separation of structures and the right coaches, and you scale the entire operation.
Right. And what I love about it is that every church is like playing like one of those board games that the board changes every time you play, and it's a different kind of, you engage differently. So it's not the same game every single time you play. And I think that is what I love about the motto about it. So 2 things, Mark, you got 1 minute, in a minute or less, 2 things I would love for you to do. Number 1, like you wrote a book about this, share a little bit about the book. And then number 2, share about the conference that you're going to be doing in November for people to get to hear about this conversation, but even the broader multi-ethnic conversation.
All in 1 minute.
In 1 minute. 1 minute. All right.
Yeah, here it comes. So resources, where do you go? How can you get help? Well, obviously I've written a couple of books on it, but the seminal book is called The Coming Revolution in Church Economics, obviously available on Amazon. The website I would steer you to specific for church economics is churcheconomists.com. Church economists, plural, economists, plural. Dhati's on there. We have a team. It's like a one-stop shop for all your needs, so to speak, with church economics, as we call it. So churcheconomist.com. On that site, you can take a free assessment, and it will tell you where your church currently sits in terms of its financial position. And then, of course, you have opportunity to talk with me about that score, churcheconomist.com. And then the conference that Dhati's talking about is Mosaics Conference, MOSAIX conference.com. We only do it every 3 years. It's a multi-ethnic church conference. And just like we're saying, these things are all intersected, right? Cultural intelligence, church economics, all of this, the nonprofit engagement, community development, it's all to support and flow from, as Dr. John Perkins and Coach forever ago did. The church is integral to that, but we have to be advancing justice, compassion, mercy, doing Matthew 5:16 work, and to sustain it in the 21st century, get beyond this with tithes and offerings. So that conference, Mosaics Conference in Dallas, November 11 through 13, mosaicsconference.com.
Wonderful.
Amen. I think that was a minute.
I didn't time it. I'm going to give it to him. I'm going to give it to him.
It was a pastor's minute.
That was a good over-under. Yes. I like it.
It was a pastor's minute, right?
Yes, there you go.
It was definitely a pastor's minute. So again, Mark, I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
I enjoy doing the cohort. I enjoy every time I get a chance to come to Little Rock, every time I get a chance to talk with you, interact with you. You guys, he's the real deal. He's the real deal. And I'm, and I don't say that often, and I know there's a lot of people that that I connect with and all that. But Mark, I appreciate you. Appreciate your grind. Appreciate your hustle. And appreciate what you do it all for the glory of God. And so, man, be blessed, and thank you for coming on to the show.
You bet, bro. Thanks for having me. And ditto back to you. You are one of the very few people in my world and all the people I know that I have absolute 100% confidence in heart, mind, your work, and likewise. And we're not just trading these things because we like each other. It's legit. So I appreciate you, Dhati. Miss you too, and all you're doing with the Boulevard.
Thank you.
All right. And this is another
episode.
This is My Boulevard. Until next time. Peace.